Scottie Scheffler told PGA Tour officials exactly what he thinks about how they pair players for marquee groups. And the room went quiet. This was not a social media post, not a carefully worded statement from an agent. Sheffler said it directly, on record, to the people who run the events he wins. And the specific thing he said about how the tour decides who plays with whom and why they decide it has been circulating through the locker room since the words left his mouth. The pairing system at PGA Tour elevated events has always been presented as a neutral, merit-based process. The tour picks the groups. We're talking about a system that affects 167 players across every elevated event this season. Every grouping, every tee time, every Sunday pairing. And the number one player in the world just said out loud that the system is not what the tour claims it is. Honestly, I think Sheffler just handed tour officials a problem they cannot manage quietly. Because when the most credible name in the sport says the process is commercial theatre, it stops being a complaint and starts being a verdict. Is Sheffler right that the pairing system is built around? Here is how the pairing process actually works at PGA Tour elevated events and where the conflict lives. The tour's official position is that marquee groupings at signature events are selected by tournament directors in consultation with the tour's competition department. They factor in world ranking, recent form, and what they describe as player and fan experience. That last phrase is the one that matters. Player and fan experience is tour language for we put the most recognisable names together because that is what the broadcast partners want in the featured group coverage. The tour is selling a pairing as a competitive grouping when it is actually a broadcast unit. Sheffler said that, on record. And what he said next is what set the conversation off. That is coming up. Scottie Scheffler has played 47 PGA Tour elevated events since the signature event model launched in 2024. He has been placed in the marquee broadcast group in 39 of them. 39 times the tour put him in the group that gets the featured coverage, the earliest camera attention, and the most crowded galleries from the first hole. He is measured, calm in press conferences, not someone who complains for the sake of being heard. So when Sheffler sat down at TPC Sawgrass during his Tuesday availability this year, and a reporter asked whether he had any input into his pairings, what he said was not the answer anyone was expecting. He told the room, "I've raised it through the proper channels. My preference has been pretty clear. I'm not sure it gets factored in the way they say it does." Read that carefully. I'm not sure it gets factored in the way they say it does. From Scottie Scheffler. The player who wins 30% of the elevated events he enters. The player whose name in the broadcast... That is not a complaint, that is a specific accusation about the gap between what the tour says and what it does. And it is on audio from the most credible voice in professional golf right now. He said the process does not work. Not that he dislikes the outcome, that the process itself is not what they claim. The tour's pairing policy states that player preferences are considered where operationally feasible. Sheffler raised his preference through official channels as the policy describes, and his read, stated publicly, is that what they told him about how preferences get weighed does not match the groupings that act. You are a player ranked inside the top 20. Not top 5, not a household name yet, but good enough to be in elevated events and serious enough about your preparation that the grouping you get on Thursday morning affects your week. You watch Sheffler say on record that the player preference system does not work the way the tour describes it. You have filed preferences. They have not been reflected in your groupings either. Do you say something? or do you stay quiet because you need tour officials on your side for the next roster decision that affects your card? Most players stay quiet. Sheffler did not. Go back to when the signature event model launched. The tour sold the restructuring to players on two promises. First, bigger purses at fewer, more important events. Second, a better competitive experience, more preparation time, smaller fields, the best players competing against each other at courses that rewarded the best golf. Players who stayed through the Live War bought into that second promise specifically. They were not just staying for the money. They were staying because the tour said the new model would treat elite players differently, as partners in a product, not just... What actually happened is that smaller fields and higher stakes made the broadcast groupings more commercially valuable, which made the tour more protective of those groupings, which made player preferences less influential, not more. The promise was better experience for elite players. The outcome was higher value broadcast units that the tour does not want individual players to disrupt with preference requests. Now here's the part nobody is talking about. The PGA Tour's broadcast agreements with CBS and NBC include specific language about featured group coverage. The networks pay for rights to specific pairings. They are the network executives who negotiated featured group language into the rights deal. Sheffler raising his pairing preference through the tour's official player channel goes to the competition department. The competition department's ability to act on that preference is limited by what the broadcast agreement requires the featured group to look like. He is filing preferences with a department that does not have the authority to honour them. The tour built a player feedback system that feeds into a process the broadcast contract already decided. That is not conspiracy. That is just what the rights deal structure produces when commercial value and player preference point in different directions. And right now, Scheffler's preference and the network's featured group requirements are pointing in different directions every... Rory McIlroy, 4 majors, the most publicly pro-tour player of his generation. The person who spent 3 years telling anyone who would listen that the PGA Tour's new model was the right direction for the sport. McIlroy told Golf Channel this week, "I get where Scottie is coming from, but I actually think the marquee groupings have been good for the game. When the best players go out together, the atmosphere is better, the galleries are bigger, and I think it makes us all play better. I'd push back a little on the idea that it's purely commercial." Rory defending marquee pairings is not surprising on its face. He has benefited from them. He is a player who draws enormous crowds, and being paired with other crowd-drawing players. But here is where Rory's defence does not hold for the players below him on the world rankings. McIlroy is in the marquee group because he wants to be there. His preference and the tour's commercial requirement happen to align. The pairing system works for Rory because Rory's ideal competitive environment matches what the broadcast partners want. Scheffler's complaint is not about the atmosphere. It is about preparation, about start times, about the routine disruption that comes with being in the most watched group when your pre-round process requires a specific... The US Open is the next major on the schedule. Congressional Country Club, a USGA run event, which means the PGA Tour's pairing process does not apply. The USGA controls all grouping decisions at the US Open independently. Here is the number that matters. In the last 4 US Opens, Sheffler has been paired with at least one top 10 ranked player in every round of every tournament. The USGA's grouping philosophy actually tracks closer to what Sheffler described as his preference, groupings based on score and round position, not broadcast value. Scheffler's record at USGA events is better than his record at tour events with commercial pairing requirements. Over the last 2 seasons, his strokes gained average in rounds where he is not in the tour designated marquee group is 0.4 strokes per round. Over 72 holes, that is 1.6 shots. In a major, 1.6 shots is often the difference between winning and contending. The data Sheffler's team brought to tour officials when they raised the pairing preference formally included this number. The tour's response was to point to the broadcast agreement. You have data showing you play measurably better when you are not in the commercial marquee group. You bring it to tour officials. They point to the network contract. What do you do next time a reporter asks you whether your pairing preferences are being considered? You say, I'm not sure it gets factored in the way they say it does. Now pull back from the pairing process. Pull back from the broadcast language in the rights deal and the 0.4 strokes per round and the 39 out of 47 marquee groupings. Look at what the tour actually built. They created a player feedback system. They gave it official channels, a competition department, and language in their communications about how player preferences are considered where operationally feasible. They told players explicitly that the signature event model would create more space for elite player input. And then they signed a broadcast. That is the actual design, whether they meant it to be or not. And Sheffler, who filed preferences through the official channels and watched his groupings come out exactly as the broadcast requirement demanded, figured it out the hard way. This is the same pattern as the schedule consultation, the same pattern as the compensation conversation. The tour creates a process, the process has official steps, and the official steps feed into a decision that was already shaped by a commercial agreement the players were not part of. The players who stay loyal and use the process get the same outcome as the players who never file a preference at all. The process documents that they were heard, the outcome proves they were not. Is the PGA Tour's player input system? Here is the specific moment that settles this. The Players' Championship next year. TPC Sawgrass. The Tour's own event on its own course run entirely by PGA Tour officials. No USGA, no Augusta National. Pure Tour governance from the grouping sheet to the tee time to the featured coverage window. Sheffler is going to be in the marquee group. The broadcast requirement will demand it. And when the Tuesday media availability comes and a reporter asks whether his pairing preferences were considered, his answer will tell you whether anything changed between this year's statement and next year's tournament. If the answer is still, I'm not sure it gets fact. My verdict, one sentence. The tour gave players a voice in the process and then signed a broadcast deal that decided the outcome before the voice could be heard. If you want the full breakdown of how the broadcast contract language actually limits player input across every elevated event this season and which tournament is next to feel it, subscribe, because the Players' Championship pairing sheet comes out in 8 weeks. And what it shows will either prove Scheffler wrong or prove he was exactly right. This story is not over.